Heavy was the burden of being green on this week's Star Trek Discovery. Space. A continuous extension interval between planets, stars and other objects. These are the critiques of the critic McElvoy. His continuing mission to review strange new shows, to seek out new work and new bastardizations, to boldly note what no critic has noted before. Well, ladies and genitals, as we march toward Discovery's finale, we're so very nearly there. Not quite, of course. Life isn't that good, but we're close. And in the 7th episode of 10, we find ourselves in conflict with the Breen. The Breen, you'll remember, one of the Alpha Quadrant's big antagonists that were never seen during the run of the Next Generation Deep Space Nine. Did they live in the Alpha Quadrant or did they live in Beta Quadrant? I'm not sure. Boy, I wish I could be bothered to check on Memory Alpha, but hey, if the writers of this show can't be fucked, why should I? So, the Breen, of course, were underdeveloped back in the day. They were masked villains that, spoke in an incomprehensible dialect, like Russians, and you didn't know anything about their culture or anything about their society or anything at all really about them, other than they were duplicitous shits who joined the Dominion War as part of the Axis of Evil. That's all we knew about the Breen back in the day. But Discovery needs a villain. This chase needs more than Mullen Locke. Locke is a Breen, we now know, of course. And that's not a bad way, I suppose, to reintroduce the Breen via the back door as the season's big bad, the main antagonist. The only problem with that, of course, is, well, it's getting late in the day, I mean, it's episode 7 in the final season, and the final season only has 10 episodes. So just at the very point where the Breen become a real presence, become almost defined and dangerous, the show's over. Unless there are more Star Trek shows set in the 32nd century, and why would there be? The Breen as the big bad isn't really worth doing, is it? But of course, having said that, I know what you're thinking. I'm thinking it too. Starfleet Academy, Tilly and Mick at Starfleet Academy, the Breen as the new great threat to the Federation. It's going to be really exciting to experience that threat through the prism of education on Earth. So, in Arija, I don't know how it's pronounced. Arija meaning a sort of Breen bounty blood debt or what have you. The Breen came to the fore as part of the Chase, the new Chase, the sequel to the Chase 2, if you like. And for me, this sort of was a reminder that Discovery has never really had a proper antagonist of its own. It's had fleeting antagonists, hasn't it? It's had the Red Angel and Control and all that sort of thing. The Klingons were borrowed from the original series. It's hard to remember now because it was so long ago, but the first 2 seasons of Discovery were TOS adjacent, so they borrowed their villains. But if you think about Gene Roddenberry's philosophy going to Star Trek The Next Generation, for example, it's determination not to retread over old ground, to cultivate new antagonists, and therefore create new avenues for storytelling. Think about what was done during that chaotic first season of The Next Generation. You had the introduction of the Ferengi, who we just have to hope isn't one big anti-Semitic trope. Hey, it never occurred to me during the original run, but, that's the world we live in now. The Romulans were rebooted. They became quite formidable, didn't they? As villains. And then the hammer blow of the Borg.
They will follow this ship until you exhaust your fuel. They will wear down your defenses. Then you will be there. Admit it, Picard, you're out of your league. You should have stayed where you belong.
And that's all by early in the second season of TNG. Even in that chaotic writer's room, that cauldron of madness, that cesspit of incongruity, they managed to introduce 3 big powers that weren't the Klingons, that sort of set up what the 24th century looked like in a sort of geopolitical context. What do we know about the 32nd century? Some of you will be thinking, hang on, we've seen the Breen earlier in the run of Star Trek Discovery, haven't we? No, you're thinking of the Orions. They were also green. Green's a thing for this writer's room. I don't know why. But it just reminds us that in the 32nd century, the exact coalitions of power have not been fully defined. We haven't seen a star map, have we? Which tells us comprehensively how space is divided up in the 32nd century. We don't know who the big powers are. I mean, we now know the Breen are a big power. We know that the Orions have gone backwards, weirdly, and are now slave traders, having formerly been slaves. But we don't really know a lot more, do we? We've not heard anything about the Klingons, for example. We know that the Vulcans and the Romulans coexist on one homeworld. Well, that's fine. They're part of the Federation, and that's also fine. But we don't know to what extent they're considered to be a formidable power of their own. Because the groundwork hasn't been done, has it? And it needs to be done in order to give the 32nd century some definition. If this show has been written by the 90s writing team of Star Trek, I'm talking about DS9, TNG's writing team, not the people on Voyager, then the first thing they'd have done said, right, if we're going to set the show in the 32nd century, what does the 32nd century look like? We're not going to take some city out like The Burn, which is taking it back to some, fragmented post-apocalyptic wasteland. We're going to say 32nd century is a thriving but maybe a dangerous time, and these are the big players in the 32nd century, and this is their relationship to one another, and this is where the Federation fits in. This is what it's a bulwark against. These powers, this new axis, who are they? What do they want? We don't know that because instead of doing all of that, Star Trek Discovery's writers have concentrated on how do the characters feel? Are you alright, Dr. Culber? You alright, Tilly? You're right, whoever the hell the rest of you are. They're so obsessed with that they're not actually in the business of world building, are they? You know, like a fucking Star Trek writer might be. So it's a little too late, isn't it, to shoehorn in the Breen as big villainy. It's convenient because up to now this chase was, what, between Discovery and Mullen Lock? That's not enough. That's not enough meat on the bones. To be bigger stakes than that. So this episode was a sort of second digression which bought some time to bring in the Breen and build them up a little bit and show how dangerous they were. We've had little hints of it in previous episodes, but now we know. You know, they have dreadnought ships which are apparently larger than Federation headquarters, and they're serious about getting the progenitors' technology, though of course they've only just learned of it through Mull. Didn't know about it before, so they've only just entered the chase with 3 episodes to go. So it's now become a galactic concern. So the finale will be Mick facing off against the Breen, a race we've just got to know, for a technology that's undefined. We still don't know what it does. We've only got 3 episodes left to find out just what it is and how it works, and, you know, what the Breen would do with it that would be so awful that we couldn't do ourselves. No, the Breen have just used the progenitor's thing to fire their DNA into the primordial soup of a world. Oh my god. You know, and as soon as 3 billion years from now, there could be a new species of super Breen. $3 billion years would be a long time to kind of stave off a threat, wouldn't it? Don't you think? That's going to be the finale to a meandering show that doesn't know its arse from a black hole. Oh, Alex Kurtzman, you do love your petty torments. With that, it's anomalous readings. This episode saw the return of a few characters that the writers think we've missed, but we haven't. I'm talking about Lieutenant Nan, who's the security officer. Do you remember her? The only thing you're going to remember her for is when she said, "Yum yum." Yum yum. You remember her now? Well, Yum Yum was back. And so too was Reno, another character that the Discovery Writers' Room love, but the general audience has never warmed to, on account of the fact that she's not really a character so much as a snark in human form. And in this episode we discovered that she'd once been a courier for old books. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the sort of thing I imagined her to be involved with. Who do we have on the ship who's an expert in old books, ancient manuscripts, old folios? Reno! We got a bit of background on the Breen, how their royal succession works, and their lines and all the rest of it. It's very late in the day, as I say. Too late, I would argue. The word shit kept coming up again and again and again, or variants thereon. Shit or shite. It looks like what's happened at the beginning of the season is that the Discovery's Writers' Room have got together and said, remember this, we've got to keep this show edgy, but we don't want to alienate the fans too much, so we won't say fuck and we absolutely won't say cunt. What about shit? Whenever I think of this show, I think shit. Let's keep saying it. Let's work it in at least once an episode. Someone out there is going to interpret that as a sort of winking at the audience. Bit of irony. Oh, they know it's shit. They keep telling us so every week. Well, yeah, that's one explanation. There was an odd fight, which looked like it had been shot with conventional cameras and GoPros. The director's attempt at what we used to call style didn't work for me. And there was an odd edit in this episode, a cut to a different version of the same establishing shot, same wide shot, which was jarring. Whoever's editing this shit, please don't do that again. I presume you've been hired to work on subsequent Star Trek shows. Don't do it again. It's bad technique. So, next week, we're off to the Badlands. You'll remember those. That's where the Maquis used to hide out and where the Voyager was snatched and pulled into the derivative Delta Quadrant. Well, it's a name check, I suppose, wasn't it? A bit of nostalgia for us. We like a bit of nostalgia. Except in a show that's built on nothing but. So that's it. We march toward the next episode with much trepidation. Could Discovery finally get good in its last 3 episodes? What do you think? Till next time.